The F-4 Phantom II was one of the most influential combat aircraft of the Cold War. It combined high-performance air-to-air and air-to-ground capabilities like no other aircraft before it. It would become the standard by which all future aircraft would be judged. So let's go ahead and take a look at the F-4C, the first Phantom available in the US tech tree. Development of the Phantom II began in 1953 when McDonnell started working on an improved version of the F-3H Demon. The main focus at first was to improve the engines, as this had always been the troubled spot on the Demon. A variant with a single Wright J67, one with two J67s, and another with two General Electric J79 engines were looked into. McDonnell would narrow it down to two variants by the end of 1953. The F-3HH was a conventional single-seat fighter bomber with two J-79 engines, while the F-3HG was the more radical of the two options. It was a modular design that mounted two J-67 engines. Both the nose and cockpit sections were interchangeable. There were several different noses that housed different kinds of radars, one with four 20mm cannons, one with 57 folding fin aerial rockets, and another with camera equipment, while the cockpit could be swapped for either a single or two-seat option depending on the mission. McDonnell would approach the Navy on the 19th of September 1953 to propose the Super Demon ideas. The Navy was sufficiently interested and ordered a full-scale mock-up. The mock-up was completed in 1954 and the decision was made to go with the F-3HH. At this point, the wing ends and horizontal stabilizers were not canted. Wind tunnel testing would soon show the need for this though, so a dog tooth and a 12-degree dihedral was added to the wing starting at the wing fold line, and the horizontal stabilizers received a 23-degree anhedral. Development continued in 1954 under a new designation YAH-1 to denote its main role as a ground attacker. However, in May of 1955, requirements were changed from a ground attacker to an all-weather interceptor for fleet defense. This came about because of the growing threat of long-range Soviet bombers. The original armament of four 20mm cannons was deleted in favor of four AIM-7 Sparrows and semi-recessed stations under the fuselage. An AN APQ-50 radar was installed to guide the Sparrows. A second seat was added for a dedicated radar intercept officer, or RIO for short, and two General Electric J79 GE2 engines, each producing 7,300 kilograms of force and afterburner, were installed. Despite the role change, it still maintained a considerable ground attack capability. The redesigned plane would receive the new designation of F4H1 to reflect this new role as a fighter. Since the previous McDonnell FH1 was called the Phantom, this new fighter was given the name Phantom II. Two XF-4H1 prototypes would be built, and the first would take off for its maiden flight on the 27th of May 1958. During these test flights, it was discovered that the air intakes would need to be redesigned. Later on in that year, a fly-off between the XF-8U-3 and the XF-4H1 took place to determine the Navy's next all-weather fleet defense interceptor. The Phantom would win out as the Navy preferred the survivability that the two engines provided and the two-seat cockpit. The Navy liked having the RIO in the plane to manage the radar and guide the pilot onto an enemy during an engagement, spread out the workload, and provide a second pair of eyes. Early production would begin in 1959. These early production aircraft featured the redesigned air intakes, added an infrared seeker under the radome, and swapped out the AN APQ-50 for the AN APQ-72. The 72 was basically a 50, but with a much larger radar dish. This required the radome to be enlarged to house it. The prototypes and early production Phantoms would go on to set 16 world records between 1959 and 1961. The first major production version of the Phantom would be the F4H1. This variant swapped the J79 GE2 engines out for J79 GE8s and redesigned the RIO's cockpit so he would have more visibility. This version would see a total of 649 aircraft built, the largest number built of any Navy variant. In late 1961, the Air Force pitted their F-106A against the Navy's F-4H1 in Project High Speed. While the F-106 won the within visual range fights, the F-4H and the AN APQ-72 dominated in the BVR arena, as well as the F-4 providing a wider range of air-to-ground ordnance and longer range. Because of this, the F-4H-1 was chosen as the new fighter for the Tactical Air Command. Following Project High Speed, the Air Force borrowed two Navy F-4H-1s, temporarily designating them F-110As in January 1962 to develop requirements for their own version. Following the adoption of the Tri-Service Designation System on the 18th of September 1962, the Phantom would become the F-4. The Navy variants became the F-4A and F-4B, while the Air Force variants would become the F-4C. The F-4C first flew on the 27th of May 1963. The F-4C was almost identical to the F-4B, but there were some differences. These being a full set of controls for the back seat, as the Weapons System Officer, or WISO for short, was a trained pilot, wider and lower pressure tires, deeper wheel wells to accommodate the wider tires, a revised radar system, and a refueling boom receptacle located on the spine of the aircraft. The Air Force would quickly become the largest user of the Phantom. Air Force Phantoms would be used in air-to-air, air-to-ground, and reconnaissance roles during the Vietnam War. F-4Cs would account for 42 of the 107 air victories by Air Force Phantoms in the war. In War Thunder, I believe we have a later model F-4C, as the engines and radar differ from the initial production versions. Our F-4C is equipped with the AN APQ-100. The radar has IFF, BVR, and ACM modes. The radar has three horizontal search settings, a wide 120-degree scan, a 60-degree scan, and a narrow 20-degree scan. The ranges are a bit funky, going from 6 to 11 miles, and then a big jump up to 57 miles. There are a couple more settings after that as well, but those are pretty much pointless. IFF, as always, is much appreciated at this BR. The ACM mode is a joke. Just like on the Demon, it's much easier to set the radar to the narrow 20-degree search scan when trying to lock someone off your nose. This radar hates ground clutter with a passion. You have to be below your target for this radar to work effectively. It's also prone to chaff, and with countermeasures starting to become more common at this BR, it can become a problem. Though many people are still only running just flares instead of a flare chaff mix, so you won't have to deal with chaff all that often. When it comes to warning systems, you're equipped with the AN APR-25. This is your standard NATO-style RWR that gives you the exact bearing to your target. For ballistics computer, you're equipped with the CCIP for your guns, bombs, and rockets. No CCRP, so unlike Phantoms you'll get access to later, you won't be able to toss bomb. Still, CCIP is enough to accurately put ordnance on your target. The F-4C is no slouch in the ground attack department. It has access to a wide range of ordnance that includes the Mark 80 series and M117 dumb bombs, Zuni and Mighty Mouse rocket pods, and the AGM-12B and C bullpups. Being able to carry 9,000 pounds of ordnance combined with CCIP make the F-4C a pretty good ground attack option for ground RB. Bomb loadouts also make this a good RP grinder if you want to go after bases. The F-4C gets three options for air-to-air missiles. The first missile you get access to is the AIM-9B. You initially start off with 2 stock and can unlock 4 after researching the Rank 2 modification. This is your basic 10G short-range IR missile that you should be really used to by now. This missile is alright for killing AI aircraft, but will struggle against players. The next missile you get access to is the AIM-9E at Rank 3. This is still a 10G IR missile, but unlike the AIM-9B, this missile gets an uncaged seeker head. This allows you to lead your target before you launch the missile so that the missile doesn't have to pull as hard to lead the target on its own. The missile also gets a longer range and higher top speed, allowing you to launch these from further away. You can expect the longest range you can hit a target with this missile to be about 1.7 to 2 miles. The final missile you get access to is the AIM-7D at Rank 4. This is the first proper medium-range semi-active radar homing missile you get access to in the American tech tree. The missile has a max range of 28 miles with a top speed of Mach 4. Though the practical engagement range of this AIM-7 is between 3 and 7 miles in a head-on engagement. The min range of 3 miles is because the missile takes about 1.5 to 2 seconds to begin tracking after launch, so you won't be able to get these off in close range head-ons. The missile can only pull 15 Gs, so leading the missile before launch is very important. You can't just fire this off and expect the missile to do all the work. Still, this missile is very good at taking out enemies that climb early game, and once you get a feel for them, they can be used to pick off enemies in a furball if you get into a good launch position. The F4C is one of the few planes in the game that does not have an internal gun. You do, however, get access to a 20mm M61 gun pod mounted under the belly. The gun pod has access to 12,000 rounds of ammunition, and with a fire rate of 6,000 rounds per minute, gives you a trigger time of 12 seconds. This is one of the longest trigger times for any top-tier jet. However, you do take a big hit to your performance if you do bring the gun pod. I put together a table here to illustrate the performance hit you take. So what I did is I subtracted the missile-only loadout from the missile and gun pod loadout so that I could find how much the gun pod itself reduces the plane's performance. I then divided the gun pod by the missile-only loadout to find the percentage change. So by taking the gun pod, you take a performance reduction of 59.4% to mass, 104% to drag, 69.4% to speed, 71.2% to climb rate, and 71.4% to your turn rate. In my opinion, this is just too big a reduction in performance to justify bringing the gun pod. It'll take an adjustment to your playstyle, but you can do just fine without the gun pod. When stock, you get access to only your gun pod and 2 AIM-9Bs, so go after AI attackers and ground units to grind up some RP. You should aim to unlock the Mark 81 modification first. Once you unlock this modification, you can start bombing strategic points to grind RP. It'll take 16 of your 18 Mark 81s to kill a base. Your next modification should be the Mark 82 bombs. Once unlocked, this will almost allow you to kill 2 bases in one pass. This time, it'll take 10 of your 18 Mark 82s to kill a base. From here, go ahead and start grinding out the performance and missile modifications. The F4C is powered by 2 J79 GE-15 engines, each capable of producing 7,560 kilograms of force in afterburner and 4,910 kilograms of force dry. These engines give the F4C great low-end acceleration and can push the plane up to Mach 1.08 on the deck. The wings are also very sturdy, only ripping at around 780 knots on the deck. The climb rate is also on the higher end of its peers. Though there is a reason this plane is known as a brick with wings, and that's because turning is not your strong suit. You can outturn an F-104, but that's about it. Everything you face is going to outturn you, so try to avoid a dogfight as much as you can. When it comes to playing the F4C, your playstyle is going to be determined by whether or not you decided to bring the gun pod. By taking the gun pod, you're gaining arguably the best gun for top tier with a large ammo capacity to boot. The gun will be a little difficult to aim at first, but it's nothing you can't get used to with time. When flying out, try to intercept enemy attackers with sparrows. After the initial high altitude engagements, transition into a support fighter role and help out your teammates down low. When attacking someone in a high deflection situation, don't bother using your AIM-9E as it will have a hard time tracking. Instead, close in for a pass with your gun before zooming away. Simply gain some distance and then turn back around for another pass if you didn't get him with the first one. If you chose to go into battle without the gun pod, you'll find that the F4C accelerates and climbs much quicker. This will make intercepting enemy attackers at higher altitude much easier. I typically climb at 10 degrees straight towards the enemy's airfield, then I'll set my radar to the wide 120 degree search zone and set the range to 57 miles. This will allow me to pick up enemy attackers within a minute or two of taking off. After locking one up, continue to climb towards them while staying beneath them so that your radar has an easier time tracking them. I typically will launch my sparrows around 5.5 to 6 miles. Sometimes I'll launch a follow-up sparrow depending on how the target behaves. Knowing when to launch a second sparrow is something that you'll get a feel for after playing with the aircraft for a bit. After the high altitude engagements conclude, you want to transition into supporting your teammates below you. It's the same basic principle as if you chose to take the gun pod. However, since we currently don't have a gun pod, we want to avoid getting within 1 mile of our opponent. At that range, our AIM-9E is practically useless. Instead, we want to be launching the AIM-9E from around 1.5 miles away from the target. This gives the missile time to get on an intercept course without being too far away. I typically like to employ high yo-yo tactics on enemies in a furball. So I'll close in, and if I can't get a good launch position or I get too close, I'll pull up into a climb until I'm about 2 to 3 miles away before looping over and making another attack. Do be careful of enemies with R60s and magics. These should be your primary targets as you don't have much hope of dodging a 30G missile without countermeasures. Your best hope is to outrun it. 10G missiles though aren't really that hard to dodge. A simple roll is typically all you need to defeat the missile. That about wraps everything up, so let's go ahead and go over the pros and cons before ending with the final verdict. The J79 are powerful engines that make the F4C one of the fastest planes for its BR. As long as you keep your speed up, enemies will have a tough time catching you. The AIM-70 can be a little finicky, but when employed correctly, it is a very powerful weapon. In a down tier, no other nation gets access to a weapon with similar capabilities, so make good use of them early game to pick off high altitude opponents, and don't be afraid to use them when you're down low. As long as you can get your radar pointed up towards the enemy, you can make good use of the Sparrows. The Phantom has a wide selection of loadouts for spreading freedom to all types of enemies. You can be a dedicated bomber, do some multi-role, or go pure fighter. The Phantom will excel in any of these roles you put it in. Moving over to the cons, not having flares really hurts as a BR 10.0. This is where you start to see a lot more planes with 30G and higher G missiles in general. You'll need to watch out for these planes and make sure to make them your top priority targets. Not having an internal gun is probably the biggest downside of the F4C. It forces you to make a big decision on whether or not it's worth bringing a gun pod that carries with it a large reduction to your performance. This last one is no surprise. If you look at the Phantom for even a moment, you'll know that its bulky form is not meant for turn fighting, so try not to get stuck in a turn fight if you can help it. And for my final verdict, the F4C is a very good plane, but it takes some skill to be successful with it. The missiles are very temperamental and require you to enter a very narrow launch envelope to ensure a hit. The gun pod is a big drain on your performance and can be tough to aim due to its position and general lack of maneuverability of the Phantom. Still, you carry a lot of bombs and missiles, so even if one or two miss, you can still get a respectable number of kills. So why don't you guys let me know about your experiences in the F4C and whether or not you're on Team Gun Pod or Team No Gun Pod in the comments. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope y'all have a wonderful day.